that, this follow that, or this one led to the other, and how did you do that?
Right. The question, let me start with the Joe Louis, the fist, right? Because the question about the fist has always been, how does it represent or embody black power, right? And that it, obviously the statue by itself doesn't, but it's what people do with the statue and how they react to it and those kinds of things. And so those kind of questions about, well, what do people say or do, or how do they respond to, say, the Cecil Rhodes statue, right? I mean, it seems like there's the parallel right there. But as I looked at the debate about the protests and the ways in which critics were engaging the protests, the question of, what the statue signifies or why the statue even matters, started kind of slipping away, right? If the statue represents colonialism the way that, say, Monument to Joe Louis represents, black power, just because people say it does, then, the physical object itself, in a way, it takes on less significance. But that seemed to me then to be kind of ceding a point to the Maxwell's critics and Rhodes Must Fall's critics that if underestimated or misjudged actually what was going on with the protest, right? So but it was at that point that I started rethinking what is the place of the object, or what is the role that the physical reality plays in this, and it became, the tack I took was to say, well, it's not really about any of the objects as symbols as such, but about the physical ways in which people are engaging the object, right? So it's not that Rhodes statue represents anything. It's that here are the ways in which people are moving about in a world of physical matter. That really is the point where the meaning gets generated, right? So it kind of was that progression of moving it into a more kind of corporeal or embodied space. And the only person, if you know someone else, there are only two rhetoric scholars who talk about feces, Kenneth Burke and Joshua Gunn, and that's it. And I could not find anyone else.
I'm kind of, part of me is thinking about all these symbolic actions that I'm thinking of, and all that. The use of symbolism and particularly something to deal with so intimate a reaction, so intimate. And I'm thinking, on one hand human feces is bound to get a reaction no matter what you do with it.
Yeah.
So, but to try to use it as a racial protest would even, so it's so inflammable in so many directions. And I'm wondering, you're arguing that it's a symbolic speech. Am I getting this correctly? That it's going beyond that. It's taking this into another level where it's a language on its own, and that language is communicating far more than what is literally there. Am I getting that right?
And the more is the relationship that people have with their bodies and with human ways, right? And that the argument is that the protests themselves are challenging a way in which you know, thinking is privileged over a different kind of embodied being. Right? So there's a lot of, you know, how do I want to call it? Transformations, I suppose, that have to happen, you know, with regards to, you know, what is it that rationality and argumentation have to do with how people understand their relationship to their bodies, and do we argue from a place of rationality and disembodiment, or do we argue from a place of embodiment and you know, biological necessity? And that, you know, the kind of the in my, you know, argument, the challenge to the colonial rhetoric is a challenge which doesn't just say, well, you know, we were excluded, but it's a challenge that says we were excluded because there was a certain kind of thinking about embodiment going on that we reject.
It isn't the fact that they were racist institutions that are being mocked. It's beyond that. It's taking it to another level. Then it's saying, okay, this is beyond that. We're taking the whole structure of it, what it represented, and we're attacking it in its pure symbolic nature.
Not just in its symbolic nature, but in its visceral nature. You know, visceral for the protesters. So the responses that say, whoa, we need to slow down because we need to have rational conversations, are the responses that are refusing that visceral dimension of the protest, which is where I think the real stuff is happening.
I guess I'm thinking it. I mean, that to me just takes a, how do you even respond to something that?
Right. This one. Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I'm certainly.
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of,
you know, I mean, on one hand, I'm going, yeah, okay, there. I see all the symbolism. I see all this, you know, the symbolic action, the language, the attack on symbolic institutions, all this stuff. You know, and I'm thinking, and then in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of the statements alleged to have made by Jim Fouts, and he is taking racist language to. And then I'm thinking where racist language becomes here another thing. There it's very visceral. It's,
yes. Yeah, and you know that's why the Baholo painting is kind of interesting to me, right? Because as a symbol, you know, here was a painting that was hanging in I forget what hall it was, Bremen Hall or something like this, that the students, protesters thought, okay, well, here's a painting in the university, we're protesting the university, we're going to burn the painting. Yet they're burning this painting that has this history that somehow is part of what they're, you know, they're part of the protest as well, you know.
yeah,
So
it's evolution of the protest.
yeah.
But my thought is, how can an institution respond to that?
Yeah. I haven't gotten that far. But that is the question.
Richard, I'm thinking about the connection between the townships and the plumbing and the sanitation and the daily life
Mhm.
that you described. And I'm wondering what the connection is from that to higher education. So, is it just I mean, it seems like the protest has those two geographical directions, right? And I'm wondering whether I'm wondering whether the protest then is effective in terms of both of those geographies.
The protest against the township toilets,
Mhm.
right, was to bring this, human waste into these places where it's excluded from. So like I think they poured it from bridges into the main highway to Cape Town Airport, for example,
Mhm.
right? So the idea is that and they poured it, you saw the one slide, poured it on the steps of, I forget which government building it was, Here are places where people don't have to think about those things, right? This kind of, the open air toilets and, the sewage running through the streets, is excluded from those places, and the sewage running through the streets and the open air toilets are the places that are, kind of marginalized or forgotten. And so the challenge of the protest is to say you can't have these places that are built on that kind of exclusion. And so, the parallel that I made with the university protest, what Maxwell was doing was saying, the university is kind of itself based on a similar kind of organization or exclusion of, a lived experience with, our bodies, right? So here's a space that people can go to school and do all these things because they're not having to deal with,
Mhm.
the open air toilets. Now, whether he, he overreached and undid his protest,
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether the kind of the response to that particular protest was also took into account the townships and the origin of, if you want to say, the substance of his.
Well, he doesn't say that. Like, the only narrative he has is that they were sitting around and the one guy said to him, hey, you know what, you should throw a bucket of shit on the statue, right? But the township protests did predate that, so, I don't know how to connect those two up. And he was kind of, in his initial protest, I think, if you look in the first slide, he, at the bottom, exhibit white arrogance at UCT, he was unsure about, it wasn't just a straightforward protest. He positioned it as an art
Yeah.
performance.
Well, he brought
During, there was some kind of like art, I forget what it was, there was some kind of art thing happening at the time. So he posed the protest as an art.
But he did root it in the townships by walking.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's yet another layer
Oh, there are so many layers,
to analyze rhetorically.
Right, yeah, there are a lot of layers to the whole thing. And the Baholo painting to me is just really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it invokes, like I said, this unlit torch of academic freedom, which, without getting into too much of that history, was something that was started by student protesters at Cape Town, who, the leader of that protest was involved in organizing with Stephen Biko. And Stephen Biko actually, credits this guy with helping him formulate the Black consciousness movement that led to the Soweto uprising. So it gets